Hey y'all, and welcome to Module 3. Which coincides, of course, with our third week of COUN 6613, Family Systemic Therapy. This is our first opportunity to build upon our first 2 weeks, which were really focused on describing the theoretical and conceptual rationale for systemic approaches to counseling, especially as it relates to sort of the impact of family systems upon individuals and systems themselves, and also sort of the key characteristics of family systems approaches. We talked about the attachment behavioral system, Bronfenbrenner's ecological model, and the hierarchy of needs and how they interact, and how it is important for a skillful clinician to have as part of our operating system the ways in which our clients individually and as a part of a family system are manifesting these key components of attachment, response to their general environment, and their progress developmentally through meeting the hierarchy, their needs on Maslow's hierarchy. And so this is our first chance to turn from that and build upon that foundation as we apply it to specific models for practicing family counseling or family therapy. This week we are covering 2 of the more classic models for family therapy, known as structural family therapy and strategic family therapy. These were developed and promoted during the middle to second half of the 20th century, and were developed and promoted by 2 close colleagues, Salvador Minuchin, who was essentially a psychiatrist who was initially trained as a medical doctor in Argentina, then moved to New York to learn the art of psychiatry and psychoanalysis, and began working at what was then called the Wiltwyck School for young people with behavioral concerns. Dr. Minuchin at Wiltwyck began to incorporate conjoint approaches to psychotherapy with the adolescent students at the school at a time when therapists were probably better known for promoting division actually between children and parents, as sort of a perhaps attempt to protect the children from parents who were acting in ways that were harming them. But then Minuchin's argument was, well, when these children go back to their home communities, they are likely to be to reenact the patterns that led to them coming to this placement. And so let's do what we can to change the way in which their home environment operates to improve the odds that they will have longer lasting change. This was, of course, a break from tradition at the time. Over time, Minuchin made connections with other like-minded clinicians across the United States, including Carl Whitaker and Jay Haley, who are most closely associated with strategic family therapy. Haley, as you might have read already, was a part of a consortium of clinicians based in Palo Alto, California. Also among these clinicians were Chloe Madonis, who also was, I guess, Jay Haley and Chloe Madonis got married. And then and practiced as a husband and wife for many years, published and developed their strategic model together. And also Virginia Satir, who we will talk more about when we talk about experiential models for family therapy. These were all sort of contemporaries. By the late 50s, early 60s, Dr. Mnookin had convinced Dr. Faily to move from Palo Alto to Philadelphia to be a part of what Dr. Mnookin was creating through the Child Guidance Clinic in Philadelphia, which became sort of a mecca of sorts for family therapists worldwide. People would come from all over the world to learn from Dr. Mnookin and Dr. Faily and others, and then take what they learned from these strategic and structural and strategic models back to their home communities wherever they were. So, strategic and structural, as you probably have noticed by this point, are incredibly similar. They share a lot of the same interventions and theoretical foundations. They are also both intended primarily to be conjoint styles of family therapy. So this is a bit of a break from the Bowenian tradition, which we've heard about a little bit last week, which really still continues to work with an individual, just from a point of view of helping the individual understand their family system and how the family system influenced their development. And structural and strategic, the intention is to work with the entire family, and to intervene with the family in ways that satisfy sort of the collective theory of change. The theory of change, or essentially the way in which therapists help the clients in their care address patterns of behaving, thinking, and feeling that inhibit their development and progress towards self-actualization. The ways in which the therapist takes those presenting concerns and helps the client make adjustments to their way of handling their day-to-day challenges in a way that minimizes their suffering and promotes their well-being. Well, the theory upon which strategic and structural family therapy operate is as follows. So change, in the therapeutic sense, is created through providing people with a new interpersonal experience that alters what is possible between them and alters also how the family functions. Okay? Now, if this sort of theory of change is the metaphorical house within which the clinician is practicing, then strategic family therapy would be sort of a front door entrance into the work. The key question of strategic family therapy is going to be, how does this family solve problems? Okay? What are the strategies that it is using to navigate the challenges that it faces on a day-to-day basis? Okay, so when a client is referred to the clinician's care, the clinician from a strategic point of view is looking first at the presenting problem as it is defined, and wondering about how the family's strategies for relating and navigating the challenges of life are explaining and maintaining the presenting problem. So it comes directly at the presenting concern. On the other hand, structural family therapy is more of a backdoor approach, okay? And the key question for structural family therapy is going to be, how is this family organized, and secondarily, how is the family organization serving to explain and maintain the presenting concern, okay? And so the key assumption of structural family therapy is that the family and the individual will improve their functioning based on a reorganization, reorganizing the hierarchy, reorganizing the boundaries, reorganizing the rules and relationships. That will lead to an improved functioning. The key assumption of strategic, on the other hand, is the family will improve its functioning based on a re-strategizing about solving problems, and then it also assumes that reorganization of the hierarchy, boundaries, and rules of relationships will sort of follow naturalistically as a product of re-strategizing, okay? So, as you can tell roughly, I hope, this is an attempt to make a Venn diagram of the things that are different and similar about strategic and structural family therapy, okay? In the middle here we have primarily, actually exclusively, we have interventions that are common to both models, right? Also common to both models are a couple of different things. Number one, both are considered to be normative styles of therapy, okay? They both assume and operate in reference to a norm of what is a healthy way to function. Keep in mind I said what is a healthy way to function, not the healthy way to function. Okay? One of the key criticisms of both of these approaches is that they can be, or at least leave the therapist vulnerable to taking too much of a positivistic approach to essentially shoehorn a family into one way of being, okay? However, the skillful strategic or structural family therapist can understand that they are an expert in sort of general norms of family functioning and human development, right? But the family itself is an expert on their own circumstances and how their circumstances affect the ways in which they are achieving or missing out on sort of healthy ways of relating and handling day-to-day problems. Okay, so this allows for a wider range of conceptualizations of what a healthy family would do under these circumstances, and it allows for a collaborative approach to blend the general expertise of the clinician and the specific expertise of the clients and their family system to create or to help the family make their own decisions about what makes the most sense for them moving forward to achieve their developmental goals. So, as part of this normative approach, both strategic and structural take into account interpersonal boundaries and family hierarchy, keeping in mind that family hierarchy needs to be based on how the family is demonstrating its own development, right? Under what we would typically expect in a first session, we would expect there to be adults who have gone through the developmental process. They're typically, in the 20 to 30 or beyond years old range. We have reasonable expectations that the prefrontal cortex is completely formed, and that there are no impairments to intellectual abilities, and these are the folks we want to be sort of the executive sort of generation who provides leadership and guidance for the learning generation or the children to develop into and through adolescence and into adulthood, while also perhaps having the grandparent or consulting generation to draw wisdom from as they provide guidance for the learning generation. Now, that is not always going to be the most appropriate developmental hierarchy, right? And understanding the appropriate approach to supporting a family's hierarchy needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. So, again, normative therapy, assuming and operating in reference to a norm of what is a healthy way to function under the specific circumstances of the family, taking into account interpersonal boundaries and developmentally appropriate hierarchy, and then asking key questions such as, what would a healthy family do in this situation or under these circumstances? And based on that, what do I as a clinician want to see? What do I want to help? What skills I want to help the family develop so that they can achieve their developmental goals? Both strategic and structural family therapy are idealistic in nature, in that they are shooting for what's going to maximize the individual and collective potential of the client. And again, we're trying to understand what are the patterns related to interpersonal boundaries, hierarchy, closeness or distance, and what are the sort of the basic rules of the family and how they handle day-to-day challenges. Structural and strategic family therapy are both pragmatic in nature, and that they work with what is real and in the here and now, or in other words, what is actually happening in the room. During the session, there is a high standard for honesty and directness. As you will watch videos that I have planned for us this week of family therapists, such as we have at least one planned with Dr. Mnuchin, you'll see that Dr. Mnuchin has little time for pretense and will work through each family member until he finds someone who will shoot straight with him. Both structural and strategic family therapy are transparent in nature. They do what they can to make the invisible visible, or the implicit explicit. Typically, families, as we talked about last week, will kind of get into habitual ways of relating that become sort of implicit in nature. People don't really necessarily talk about them or have a well-founded rationale for why we do these things this way. And family therapists, skillful structural or strategic family therapists, will find ways to track and name the patterns that they see in ways that will invite the family to then talk about why we do these things this way in a way that makes the implicit explicit, right? It's more typically the family therapist is working on making the unsayable sayable, or saying the unsayable, mentioning the unmentionable, because as Mr. Rogers is known for saying, if something is mentionable, then it's manageable. In other words, we can work with it if we can talk about it. Structural family therapists and strategic family therapists both work out in the open with clear strategies and inputs. There's again, high value on transparency, and families should be able to talk about what they're working on. So what a family is working on should not be a secret, should not be subversive. It should be sort of out in the open and sort of a generally understood and accepted by all participants in the process. Structural family therapy and strategic family therapy are also active models of therapy. Oftentimes there will be sort of physical movement and active engagement in the room. So a structural family therapist and strategic family therapists are very curious from the very first session about who sits where and how close do they sit, how far apart do they sit, what are the sort of nonverbal messages being sent between family members in the room, both with looks and laughs and whatever the case may be. It's kind of what is unspoken. And the therapist will perhaps find creative ways to manipulate space. And so if you have a father who's sort of sitting off to the side, we might invite him in. And also you might facilitate reparative exchanges between family members, getting them talking to each other in real time about real issues. These are the sort of characteristics of the transparency of structural and strategic family therapy. Because again, it's about giving the family a real experience and an opportunity to alter the way in which they go about solving problems and organizing the way in which they handle the day-to-day tasks that really facilitates lasting second-order change according to these models. So, all that to say, in a nutshell, both of these models of therapy are about avoiding, well, let's put it this way. They are about repairing a family's problem-solving mechanisms more so than they are about solving problems, right? Again, this gets at the second-order nature of these models. They are looking for lasting change rather than sort of superficial change. Kind of aligns with that old Eastern proverb, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. That's the kind of thing we're trying to achieve as structural or strategic family therapists. And so, one of the ways to kind of think about and organize the therapeutic process of both of these, and really perhaps you could argue all of the models we're going to try to cover this term, is to see the pattern, name the pattern, change the pattern, okay, right? Or see it, name it, change it. This is sort of a clear sequence of actions by the therapist that can lead a family to meaningful change. You're helping them to see the dysfunctional organizational or strategic patterns and help them to see these things clearly and make sense of them. What explains these things? Remembering that all problems typically start out as solutions to previous problems. So seeing the dysfunctional pattern, naming the pattern with the family in a way that is both tolerable and interesting to the family, essentially naming the pattern in a way that invites the family to make adjustments so that they can improve the odds that they will accomplish their developmental tasks. So see the dysfunctional pattern, name the pattern in a way that is interesting and inviting to the family, and then change the pattern directly and effectively to a more productive, well-being, promoting way of functioning. So, key points to remember, again, are that strategic family therapists and structured family therapists are interested in what is the family hierarchy, what are the boundary arrangements, so essentially are there clear delineations between generations and people, are there clear expectations between people and between generations, is there privacy and safety that each generation and person can expect from the other, and can people say what they need to say without undue risk of being harmed or evoking anger from other people. So we're interested in hierarchy, who's in charge here, we're interested in boundaries, and we are interested in alliances. So who works well together, who can give and receive support to and from each other. Do parents or caregivers work together or divide over the task of caring for a child? Do children cooperate with each other, or do they compete with each other for family resources, whether it be sort of food, space, or just time and attention with the big people, with their attachment figures? So these are the key things that we are kind of looking for, trying to understand and conceptualize as strategic and structural family therapists. At the beginning of a case, we are focused on depathologizing our clients in service of understanding the patterns that sort of explain and maintain the pathology, and we are interested in the way in which the system is functioning and operating more so than we are interested in the symptoms. Now, this what I just described is going to be more of an emphasis in structural family therapy than it is going to be in strategic. Strategic family therapy is also very interested in symptoms because it is interested in primarily relieving symptoms more so than is structural. Again, front door approach, back door approach, same goal of symptom alleviation, suffering reduction, health and well-being promotion. So we're doing pattern over pathology, system over symptom, keeping it positive. Remember that problems always start out as solutions, and most families are trying to do the best they can under their specific circumstances. And also the whole is always available in the part. So what that means is that the pattern that we're trying to address and change is always present regardless of the content or the specific exchanges. Typically, the pattern we're trying to address is manifested in many different ways, and upon close inspection, the pattern we're trying to address can be more visible, more easily seen, and then we have a more clear organizing principle for effecting change. So, as we help families to see and then name the things that need to be addressed, essentially what we're doing is creating what is commonly known as scaffolding. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the term scaffolding, think about a building that's being sort of renovated or painted. Especially on the outside, you are likely to see sort of a metallic structure that goes around the area that's being repaired to keep it in place so that it doesn't completely fall apart, right, during the change process. And so there are specific interventions that are used to create this scaffolding prior to making meaningful change through enactment. These scaffolding interventions include joining from a place of leadership, I might add. Again, this gets back to really truly understanding the nature of our expertise in these relationships we have with clients. We are generally experts. We have extensive training in human development, systemic sort of operations and functioning, and what has been shown to lead to sort of well-being, promotion, and reduction in suffering generally. This isn't to say that we have the right or even the capability to make proclamations or make what's the word I'm looking for? Definitive determinations about what are causes of our clients' suffering. The family's sort of conceptualization and the client's conceptualization of reality needs to be their own, right? And we can bring our own expertise and blend it with their expertise on their specific situation to help the client feel and deal with their reality and their understanding of their reality and make meaningful change to relieve their suffering and promote their well-being. So we do that we join from a place of leadership, otherwise people don't take us seriously. We won't have any credibility in the room. We have to have credibility in the room for the therapy to take root and to move on. We are using tracking and naming of patterns. So again, this is us hearing what the family is saying, but also watching what the family is doing, how they're communicating, both verbally and non-verbally, and using ourselves to describe our own experience and invite the family to see and then talk about what's happening in real time and how it is emblematic of why they're in our office, why they are in our care. So tracking is sort of being able to see and wonder about, okay, so when I see this happen, what happens next? And then what happens? Is this typical of what happens at home? Okay, well, what happens at home? That kind of thing. And then you find ways of naming it that could involve using reframe or paradox. We'll get those more in a moment. Also, part of scaffolding could be psychoeducation. So sometimes people will have questions about what to expect from their child of a certain age, or sometimes they will have questions about what has been shown to promote greater cooperation and collaboration between parents or caregivers toward raising a child. And so we can use our expertise to provide education about these things, and that serves as sort of a scaffold for preparing the family to make meaningful change. And so naming it, we see it with tracking, and then naming is, again, making the invisible visible and saying the unsayable. The goal is to describe the problem in a way that a family can understand, accept, and deal with. And we also need to keep it simple. Can we name the problem? Can we name the problematic pattern in a way that it could fit on a bumper sticker, right? The most basic voice that we use as strategic or family or structural family therapists is one of curiosity, observation, and neutrality. You'll see this manifested in the way that Dr. Nushin approaches the work that we'll see in the video that I'll share with you in another later in the module. Dr. Nushin has this sort of advantage of having an accent, so he can sort of play the role of I'm not from around here really well. Help me understand how this works. When I see this, I see this. What do you think about this? He can also do things that are somewhat provocative. That is one of his hallmarks, and also a point of criticism and contention for many who came along and analyzed and provided feedback towards his model. So ideally we can use sort of a I'm not from around here, but what I see is X, Y, and Z way of naming the pattern, and we almost always name the pattern in a way that is supportive of the executive generation, right? In other words, we do what we can to make sure that the way in which we name the pattern is structurally sound, and that structurally sound definition is going to be unique to every single family, right? So we have to be very careful to get to know the nuances that families are dealing with. So to name the pattern is sort of to name the problem. So you want families to be able to say, there's that thing that happens that we were talking about, and then sometimes you might hear people describe sort of the family theme. This is sort of a way of describing, again, on a bumper sticker, this is what we're working on so that we can be healthier and happier together. So to give you an example, in my tradition, this structural tradition, and keeping in mind I was trained clinically by people who were trained by Mnuchin and Faily, and were contemporaries with Harry Ponte, who you saw last week. They use this model in supervision as well. So each supervisee was challenged with sort of naming a pattern of sort of thinking, behaving, and feeling, and acting. I guess behaving and acting are the same. That kind of gets in their way from meeting their potential clinically as clinical practitioners. Mine was to kind of be a cowboy, right? In other words, I would come in with new families and see problematic patterns right away and kind of start going OK saloon kind of thing, like just guns blazing and naming and trying to change patterns with a lot of force, right? So that was sort of my pattern, was to kind of come in like a cowboy, and that, as you might imagine, rubbed people the wrong way. I was really getting in my way in terms of being an effective helper and clinician. And so the theme that I developed with my supervisor was to be a shepherd, not a cowboy, right? This is a way of describing what I was working on in a way that I could understand, accept, and deal with. It added a little bit of humor because it was a sort of a pun on my last name. And it also reminded me to be a more open, curious, kind, and flexible sort of presence within the room, using curiosity, observation, and neutrality to provide guidance for my clients to see, name, and then change their own patterns in ways that were effective for them. So this is sort of a way of giving an example of how to describe a pattern that's sort of interrupting a family's process and providing a theme that helps a family remember what they're working on. Again, both need to be simply stated in a way that can be written on a bumper sticker. It's easy to remember. So again, scaffolding techniques include joining, mapping, tracking, and naming, psychoeducation. Unbalancing, which is sort of helping a family do what is counterintuitive to their dysfunctional pattern. So, for example, if you have a family with one of the classic patterns of a nuclear family is to have a perhaps over-involved parent, usually it's the mom, and a peripheral parent, usually it's the dad, right? Because in this nuclear configuration, mom typically stays home and dad goes to work, right? Well, unbalancing the system would be to put mom on vacation, which would require dad to engage and provide more support and energy to the family's process. So that's one example of unbalancing. Another, it also could be sort of a use of paradox, right? When you suggest that mom go on vacation, you're likely to get a little bit of pushback, right? Because mom can't imagine the idea of taking time away from the family. It seems paradoxical and counterintuitive to what her role is as a nurturer and a caretaker in this case. So, unbalancing often uses paradox, it often uses reframe. So one of my favorite reframes is to call a child who has been referred, perhaps has already been diagnosed with oppositional and defiant disorder, essentially taking a child who's been named as defiant and reframing that energy as activist energy. This defiance is a form of protest toward an injustice that they sense in their family system. And then oftentimes scaffolding can also involve repositioning and sculpting. And then also contracting is a way of, particularly a strategic way of enlisting and inviting and getting clients to sign up for change. There are essentially, especially when you're working with parents and children, sort of 3 magic questions. So a parent delivers a message to a child and then follows up with, do you understand what I'm asking you to do? Do you think you can do it? That's the second question. And then finally, the third question is, will you do it? And then you can come to sort of a way of solidifying or signifying the agreement, maybe by a fist bump or a handshake or a pinky swear, whatever the case may be. And then the family or that dyad has a frame of reference to come back to when they're working outside the office on changing the pattern that has brought them to you. So these are all ways of setting up scaffolding, okay, in the service of what is the art of the enactment, okay? Now, the term enactment comes from psychoanalytic tradition, right? And initially refers to the manifestation of a psychological pattern in a psychoanalysis patient, right? Well, this is sort of a application of this term to the manifestation of the pattern that a family is working on, whether it be an organizational pattern or a strategic pattern, and they are working to have the pattern get up and running, recognize it in real time, and do something different that creates a new feeling, a new sign for optimism. And so after scaffolding has set up a good relationship between the family and the therapist that sets them up to follow your lead, sort of a strong sense of structural patterns and strategic patterns, a good way of talking about the dysfunction and the path toward health, and then of course the therapist's ability to rework the structures and patterns actively, directly, positively, and effectively. An enactment must be a genuine experience of an altered pattern, and an enactment has the following elements, otherwise it's not really an enactment. Enactments must be about a real issue, emotionally significant, right? So we're not talking about role play here. We're not talking about something that's sterile. We're talking about something that is actually happening and being dealt with in real time in the room. It is, thirdly, structurally sound. So you have the person that's playing in the executive role, providing leadership and guidance to the person in the learning role. Enactments are present in the here and now. As I just mentioned, they are happening in the room. They are positive, right? So we are helping families to focus on what they're longing for, not criticizing or wronging. So think longing, not wronging. And then enactments are successful, right? So enactments are about a real issue. They are emotionally significant. They are structurally sound. They are present in the here and now. They are positive. And they are successful. Otherwise, they cannot be counted as an enactment. And they must be practiced over and over again to create sort of essentially new neural pathways that become habit later. So essentially, enactments are recognizing sort of negative feedback loops, introducing positive feedback loops, and helping that feedback loop become the positive feedback loop become the norm. So that the family can enjoy lasting change. That's a lot of me talking about sort of the theoretical concepts of these models, okay? And I've got a couple of other videos from other people describing these things that may also resonate with you and help these things be clear. And then I've also got at least one other sort of example video of a clinician, most likely Dr. Mnuchin, providing structural family therapy. And I'll sort of be providing some commentary about it as he goes about his business. I look forward to kind of what unfolds for us in the discussion boards about this topic. And I'll leave it there for now. Looking forward to seeing you in subsequent videos later in the module.